Seconds of the countdown.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
Engineers pleaded with NASA to postpone. They understood that the cold weather would cause issues. Their bosses didn't pay attention to them. An engineer came home and told his wife, "It's going to blow up." The next morning, millions saw 7 astronauts die on live TV. NASA has been aware of issues since 1977. They decided to keep flying regardless. The disaster was not an unexpected accident. Here is the full truth they tried to conceal. After the Apollo missions, NASA had a new goal. They wanted to create a space shuttle that could travel to space repeatedly, making it less expensive and simpler to get to orbit. In 1972, they made the official announcement about the program. They referred to it as a space truck, capable of regularly transporting astronauts and satellites. They also wanted the shuttle to help create a future space station and make space travel feel normal, even regular. After many years of effort, the first shuttle, called Columbia, finally launched into space on April 12, 1981. It was a big moment. Columbia showed that a spacecraft could complete the journey, return safely, and be reused. After 4 test flights, NASA said the shuttle was ready for actual missions. By 1982, it was flying regularly, and people were excited about its capabilities. In the beginning, the shuttle program had many successes. It launched satellites into space, did science experiments, and even helped overcome obstacles on Earth. Sally Ride was the first American woman to travel to space. Gullen Bluford was the first African American to go to space as an astronaut. NASA was proud of the shuttle and wanted everyone to see it as dependable and strong. They assured Congress that the shuttle would fly as many as 24 times a year, even though the spacecraft had not been completely tested for such frequent use. Early success made NASA's leaders feel more sure of themselves, perhaps too sure. They started to view launches as almost normal, even though technical delays should have made them more careful. The pressure to maintain the speed only increased. By 1985, the program was going strong. That year, NASA launched 9 shuttle missions, the highest number they had ever tried in one year. But behind the scenes, things were becoming more difficult. Every shuttle required complex maintenance, and engineers were working continuously to keep up with it. Every mission faced last-minute issues, but the urgency to launch on time made it difficult to take a step back and fix everything correctly. Managers wanted results, and sometimes they prioritized meeting deadlines over ensuring everything was perfect. NASA also aimed to keep the public interested in space travel. To stay in the limelight, they began special programs. One of the main ideas was the Teacher in Space project. In 1984, President Ronald Reagan declared that an ordinary school teacher would go on the shuttle. Over 11,000 teachers applied, wanting to be the first. In 1985, NASA picked Krista McAuliffe, a teacher from New Hampshire. She trained with the astronauts and planned to teach lessons from space that would be shown to classrooms across America. Krista's story captured the public's attention. Everyone thought the idea of a teacher floating in space was great. For NASA, it was ideal, great promotion, and another way to show that space travel was becoming a regular part of life. But while the public was smiling and cheering, many engineers at NASA were starting to feel anxious. With each launch, the schedule became more cramped. Maintenance windows became shorter. Some technical problems remained unsolved, but since earlier flights had dealt with similar issues, managers began to act as if everything was fine. This attitude was called the normalization of deviance. This meant that risky problems didn't look so risky anymore because they hadn't led to a disaster. One of the biggest dangers was hidden inside the shuttle's solid rocket boosters. These boosters were made in sections, and each section was sealed with rubber O-rings. The concept was straightforward. When the boosters fired, the heat caused the O-rings to expand and close any small gaps. But early tests from 1981 and 1982 showed a worrying sign. Oves, los O-rings no se lavan de manera adecuada. Hot gases escaped through the joints, leaving soot marks where everything should have been sealed tight. In August 1984, after a flight, inspectors discovered soot stuck between 2 O-rings. This meant that the first seal did not work. Solo el segundo O-ring, había salvado la misión esa vez. It was a clear message. The boosters were not as safe as people believed. By 1985, things had gotten worse. In January of that year, the shuttle took off on a chilly day. the O-rings in both boosters showed signs of wear. In fact, nearly every shuttle flight that year had some damage to the O-rings. On one flight, even the extra O-ring was broken. Engineers from Morton Thiokol, the company that produced the boosters, became very concerned. Roger Boiscioli and Alan MacDonald, two of their best engineers, worked hard for changes. They proposed new designs, improved O-rings, and even adding a third O-ring for extra safety. The company began making better boosters, but they wouldn't be ready for a while. In the meantime, the old boosters continued to be used. Everyone knew there was a problem, but previous successes led people to believe it was safe to keep going. Flights had weathered O-ring damage in the past, so managers began to think they would always be fine. Some engineers had a strong disagreement. Roger Boiscioli even wrote a memo alerting that if no action was taken, lives would be at risk. He called it a disaster waiting to happen, but most people ignored his warnings. NASA managers had grown accustomed to minor issues, and thought that since nothing major had occurred so far, nothing serious would happen in the future. Each successful mission only boosted their confidence. They believed the risk was okay. The communication between engineers and managers fell apart completely. The danger was increasing, but not many leaders really paid attention. At the end of 1985, NASA got ready for the Challenger's next mission, STS-51L. It was going to be a major event. 7 people were scheduled to fly, including Commander Dick Scobie and pilot Michael J. Smith, along with mission specialists Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, and Ronald McNair. 2 payload specialists, Gregory Jarvis and Krista McAuliffe, who was a school teacher, were also joining. Krista's role made this mission unique. She would be the first teacher from the general public in space, and millions of school children were excited to watch her classes live from orbit. The excitement was unlike anything NASA had experienced before. The mission had key objectives. In addition to the Teacher in Space program, Challenger was meant to launch a $100 million communication satellite and look at Halley's Comet. It would be the 25th mission of the shuttle program, and the 10th flight of Challenger. The original launch date was January 22, 1986, but it encountered some problems. Delays from the last shuttle mission delayed everything. Bad weather and technical problems led to more delays. The Challenger crew had to put on their suits and prepare several times, only to have the launch called off at the last moment. But by the time the launch was rescheduled for January 28, it was already the 7th try. The astronauts managed the delays calmly, even though it was annoying. In interviews, they smiled and stated that they trusted NASA to prioritize safety. None of them were aware of the strong fears that some engineers had about the weather they would encounter. The night before the launch, a strange chill spread across Florida. By midnight, the air near Kennedy Space Center was very cold. Ice built up on the launch pad. It was much colder than on any other day a shuttle had launched before. The weather report indicated it would be about 30 degrees Fahrenheit in the morning. At Morton Thiokol, the engineers quickly became concerned. They knew that in the cold, the rubber O-rings in the shuttle could become less flexible. If the seal is not good, there might be a leak. If there was a leak, the entire shuttle could be ruined. The engineers rushed to alert everyone. They held meetings and informed their managers that starting in such cold conditions would be risky. Roger Boiscioli and Bob Ebeling were 2 of the people who firmly opposed it. They had previously observed the O-rings having difficulties, even at 53 degrees. Ahora, hacia aún más frío. They were worried that the rubber would harden like plastic and couldn't seal properly when the rocket engines started. NASA held a late-night video call to discuss it. Engineers from Thiokol talked with NASA officials in Florida and Alabama. Boiscioli's team presented charts, reports, and issued serious warnings. They asked for a delay. They knew it would be embarrassing. They knew it would make many people angry, but they thought it was better to be late than to endanger lives. NASA managers were upset. They were fed up with the delays. The launch of Challenger had already been delayed several times. The pressure was increasing. Some officials, such as Lawrence Malloy, were upset. He even shouted, asking if Thiokol wanted them to wait until April. NASA claimed that the engineers' evidence was not strong enough. They noted that even though O-rings had worn out before, the shuttles had still managed to survive. Thiokol's management felt stuck between their engineers and NASA. In a moment that would later trouble them, they asked their engineers to consider the bigger picture. to take on management roles. The warning voices became quieter. Under pressure, Thiako's leaders changed their minds. They informed NASA that they were okay with the launch. Boisholi and the others were very sad. One of them even went home and told his wife, "It's going to blow up." When morning arrived, the cold had not gone away. Ice was still clinging to the metal rails. NASA teams examined it and concluded that it wasn't a serious threat. They said it could harm the shuttle if it fell off, but it wasn't serious enough to cancel the launch. The countdown continued. Around 11:30 a.m., the astronauts got into the shuttle. They put on their light flight suits and secured themselves. Nadie les habló sobre las discusiones de anoche. They smiled for the cameras and got ready to fly. Crowds packed the viewing areas, even though it was cold. The families of the crew were present. Krista McAuliffe's students were present as well, excited to see their teacher become the first regular person in space. All over the United States, millions of children were in classrooms, focused on TVs, waiting for history to unfold. A las 11:38 a.m. Challenger despegó. Flames and smoke came out from the engines. It rose into the blue sky, first slowly and then quickly. The crowd shouted with joy. From the ground, it appeared perfect. But if someone looked closely, small puffs of gray smoke started to come out from the right booster almost right away. The O-ring was not sealing properly. No one noticed in time. The shuttle continued to ascend. 1 minute after takeoff, Challenger reached the point of highest air pressure called max Q. Everything still appeared okay. Houston contacted the shuttle and informed them they could increase the engine power. Commander Dick Scobie responded calmly, "Roger, go at throttle up." Those were the final words anyone heard from Challenger. 73 seconds after it launched, a bright flash lit up the sky. Fire and smoke burst out. The shuttle fell apart in a shocking moment. People nearby were surprised. Parts of the shuttle fell down in various directions. The large orange fuel tank had exploded, contributing to the fireball. In mission control, there was complete silence. The commentator spoke softly, mentioning that there had been a big problem. The screens displayed no more signals from the shuttle. Everything had become dull. It took weeks of research to discover what really happened in those first 73 seconds. At first, people believed Challenger had blown up like a bomb, but that wasn't completely accurate. The shuttle really came apart in the air. The actual cause began at takeoff. When the boosters fired, the rubber seal known as the O-ring on the right side didn't seal correctly. That morning was very cold, and the O-ring had become stiff. Hot gas began to escape through a small opening. For a short time, pieces of burnt material blocked the hole and kept the shuttle functioning. Challenger climbed into the sky. Pero el daño ya estaba hecho. About a minute after takeoff, Challenger encountered strong winds at a high altitude. The shuttle trembled from the pressure. The shaking loosened the plug that was stopping the leak. At 64 seconds, cameras saw a small flame on the right booster. That flame marked the start of the downfall. It burned increasingly hotter, slicing into the large outer fuel tank. Moments later, the fire made a hole in the tank. Hydrogen and oxygen, extremely cold and under pressure, combined in a powerful explosion. At 73 seconds, the right booster detached and hit the tank. The entire structure fell apart. Challenger was not strong enough to handle it. Traveling at nearly twice the speed of sound, the shuttle broke apart. The nose, tail, and wings all came off in the cold, thin air. What people watched on TV appeared to be an explosion. Pero no era el transbordador explotando en una sola pieza. It was the fuel that sparked and the broken pieces that fell apart. The two rocket boosters, still active, spun out of control until ground controllers blew them up to ensure people's safety. In mission control, someone spoke over the radio. "We received a report from the flight dynamics officer, stating that the vehicle has exploded." The room was filled with panic. Los controladores se congelaron. No había nada que pudieran hacer. Emergency procedures began right away. The doors were shut. Data servers were shut down. Rescue teams were sent to look for the debris in the ocean, 20 miles from the Florida coast. The saddest question was about the crew. The cabin where the astronauts were seated had come loose and continued to fly on its own. No sé cómo, it went even higher, reaching about 65,000 feet, before coming back down to Earth. The cabin was built strong, and it mostly stayed intact. Inside, the astronauts were shaken around roughly, but later evidence showed that at least some of them were alive after the breakup. 3 emergency air packs were activated manually. Commander Scobie's was not, but pilot Mike Smith's, and 2 others were. Investigators also discovered that cockpit switches had been shifted from where they were supposed to be during launch. Mike Smith may have been attempting to take control again. It must have been very frightening. The cabin didn't have electricity. It was dropping quickly. It was also losing air pressure, which could have caused the crew to pass out before hitting the ocean. When the cabin landed in the water, it was traveling over 200 miles per hour. The impact was brutal and impossible to survive. NASA later stated that they couldn't be certain about the exact timing of the crew's death. The forces during the breakup were manageable. The last crash is what caused their deaths. At that time during the flight, there was no way to get away. One of the toughest truths about the Challenger disaster was something NASA didn't discuss openly. Back on the ground, surprise spread across the country. This was meant to be a proud day, because the first teacher was going to space. Instead, millions of people, including students, watched a disaster unfold live on TV. Families who had come together to celebrate cried openly. At the Kennedy Space Center, parts of Challenger dropped into the ocean. Mission Control was quiet, filled with anger and tears. Every TV network interrupted their programs to show what occurred, replaying the terrible moment over and over. It was the first deadly accident of an American spacecraft while flying, and it occurred right in front of everyone. That afternoon, NASA canceled all shuttle missions to Duce de Tuvo. President Ronald Reagan was supposed to deliver an important speech to Congress that night, but he canceled it. Instead, he addressed the nation directly. In the Oval Office, he reassured the children who had seen and respected the courage of the crew. He finished by quoting a poem about reaching out to God. His words brought some hope to the country on a difficult day. 3 days later, a memorial took place at Johnson Space Center in Houston. Reagan and the First Lady were with NASA workers, their families, and friends. The weather was chilly and cloudy. Military jets flew above in a missing man formation, a respectful tribute to the crew that was lost. Reagan talked again, saying that aiming high sometimes leads to failure, but America must keep trying. His speech showed the pain and bravery that were in the heart of the country. After the Challenger explosion, the entire country was shocked. People wanted quick answers. A few days later, President Reagan announced a special commission to look into what went wrong. William P. was in charge. Rogers, a past Secretary of State, Peter Rogers no estaba solo. He had a team with many famous people, including astronaut Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon. There was also General Chuck Yeager, astronaut Sally Ride, and the well-known physicist Richard Feynman. The message was straightforward. This was not going to be a careless review. They were determined to uncover the truth. Initially, NASA attempted to begin its own investigation, but people didn't believe that NASA could investigate itself. The Rogers Commission took complete control. They wanted genuine answers, and they wanted them from all the people involved. In the next few months, they spoke to over 160 people. They divided into small teams, with each team working on different parts of the puzzle. Some focused on the technical problem. Others studied how NASA made choices. Some explored the history of the shuttle's boosters, and an important group, led by Sally Ride, examined the pressure NASA faced to stick to its timeline. The public saw much of this investigation on TV. One of the most memorable moments came from Richard Feynman. During a hearing, he dropped a small piece of rubber, like the type used in the shuttle's joints, into a glass of ice water. When it got cold, he squeezed it to show how hard and fragile it became. It was a very simple experiment, but it clearly showed why the Challenger exploded. The rubber piece, known as the O-ring, became stiff in the cold and couldn't work properly. Feynman's bold approach ensured that the investigation was not made to seem nicer than it really was. Later, he wrote a specific section of the final report. In it, he accused NASA of ignoring clear warnings and having blind trust in a system that was not as safe as they said. As the investigation progressed, the reason for the disaster became obvious. But the hot gases from the shuttle's booster got past the O-rings and caused the explosion. No había nada más de que culpar. No fue el tanque de combustible ni nada fuera del transbordador.
The O-rings, made weaker by the cold that morning, were the ones that failed. Pero la comisión no se detuvo ahí. They investigated further, and discovered that NASA had been aware of O-ring issues for many years. Since 1977, there were warnings, but NASA and the booster company, factual, did not improve the design. They agreed to the risk even though they didn't completely grasp how dangerous it could be. Even worse, the warnings just before the launch were not heeded. The night before Challenger launched, factual engineers asked for a delay due to the cold temperatures, but their worries didn't reach NASA's top leaders. Instead, middle managers, under pressure to keep on schedule, made the final decision. The Rogers Commission revealed how poorly NASA was communicating. If the right people had listened to the warnings, the launch could have been stopped. There were also rumors that the White House wanted the launch to happen before President Reagan's State of the Union address. Some people believed that NASA wanted the president to talk about the mission in his speech. However, when the commission investigated, they found no clear proof that the White House pressured NASA. Reagan's draft speech briefly mentioned a space experiment, but did not talk about the Teacher in Space program. In the end, the pressure appeared to be coming from within NASA itself. They made big promises, and were eager to ensure the shuttle was on schedule. When the final report was released in June 1986, it didn't only point fingers at the O-rings, it criticized the entire system. The commission made 9 key recommendations. First, they said the shuttle's joints needed to be redesigned, to make sure this kind of failure wouldn't happen again. Pero eso no fue suficiente. They also told NASA to completely change how it ran the shuttle program. From now on, engineers' issues needed to be addressed by higher management. They proposed setting up a new office focused on safety that would report straight to the NASA administrator. They also said that astronauts should be part of important decisions, because they are the ones risking their safety. If NASA had listened to their engineers that night, things might have turned out differently. On January 27, 1986, the O-Coal's engineers were certain. They cautioned about the cold weather, and how risky it could be for the shuttle. If NASA management had been more careful, Challenger would not have launched the next day. It could have been delayed for days, or even weeks, until Florida got warmer again. In that situation, the O-rings wouldn't have been as fragile. The shuttle would have gone up, finished its mission, and returned home. Krista McAuliffe would have gone back to her students, and possibly become a well-known advocate for space education. NASA might have heard some jokes about another delay, but they would have escaped a serious problem. Quietly, behind the scenes, they may have solved the O-ring issue without anyone outside the program even realizing it was a problem. Sin embargo, eso no ocurrió. The thinking at NASA was focused on one goal: initiar. When you prioritize schedule over safety, mistakes can lead to tragedies. The Challenger disaster happened not because people were unaware of the risks, it was because those who knew weren't listened to. There has been a lot of discussion about whether the White House was involved in it. Some people say that Washington pressured for the launch to happen on schedule. President Reagan was preparing for his State of the Union speech, and it would have been a great opportunity to talk about the teacher in space. There were rumors that NASA felt pressured to keep to the schedule at all costs. Officially, no one has ever discovered a direct order from the president or his staff. But in a place like NASA, even a small amount of political pressure can have a big impact. They had already postponed Challenger several times. Perhaps, deep down, they wanted to avoid any further delays, especially on the day Reagan was set to address the country. We can't be sure if that's what occurred, but it's easy to see how that kind of pressure, whether real or not, could have led managers to keep going when they should have paused. Some people have also looked into whether business and politics were involved as well. Morton Fiacol, the company that made the solid rocket boosters, received the contract with a lot of political support. Some people believe the booster design was weaker because of this, and that fixing it would have been too expensive and time-consuming. The official investigation didn't find evidence of corruption, but it did reveal something equally harmful: a system where voicing your opinions could lead to losing contracts or jobs. The O-Coal engineers were aware of the problems, but management didn't want to be blamed for slowing down the shuttle program, or losing NASA's trust. By the time Fiacol called for a complete redesign in 1985, it was too late. The desire to cover up mistakes and wish for a good outcome instead of fixing problems became fatal, not only at vehicle, but also within NASA también. Big organizations often react more harshly to bad news than to poor performance, and Challenger became the final example of that way of thinking. What if Challenger had made it through that morning? What would have happened if the cold didn't make a difference, and the O-rings had worked? The shuttle would have finished its mission. Krista McAuliffe would have taught her lessons from space. Children all over America would have seen history being created. The Teacher in Space program would have continued. More civilians would have traveled on the shuttle. Barbara Morgan, who was McAuliffe's backup, could have been the next teacher in space. NASA would have stuck to its tight schedule and launched more missions in 1986. However, beneath that success, the O-ring problem remained. No one would have solved it, because nobody would have realized how near they were to a disaster. Later that year, another shuttle might have been lost. Perhaps Atlantis. Talvez outra misión. Some people say the next explosion could have been worse, during a secret military launch where the risks were greater. It's a scary idea. The Challenger disaster made everyone realize the seriousness of the situation. Without it, the danger might have remained unnoticed until it harmed even more people.